an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, the book club surprise, covering Eragon by Christopher Paolini. In this episode, I am joined by the Overdue boys, Craig and Andrew, and we are going to talk about this book that I did not like and that they are going to be much kinder about, for the most part, than I will be. Welcome to Unspoiled.
How do people feel about dragons? That's
Just
where
in
I would
general?
love to start. Like, we're all here to talk about the book Eragon by Christopher Paolini, and it's a word that's very similar to dragon. It's just one letter different, and there is a dragon in the book. How do we feel about dragons?
I mean, they're pretty boss, right? In
They're
general?
like badass, but like anything that's not mammalian. It's not as cuddly. I want an animal that I can like snuggle. The one pro is that they are hot blooded, evidently. So
Sure.
That helps.
I checked it and saw.
Yeah.
It was hot. So you would rather ride on like a never ending story dog
Yes.
lizard than
100%.
than a dragon.
unless he smells like a dog.
It's
Down-
how do you bathe like a
Yeah.
an 80-foot long dog dragon? I don't know.
Maybe he has fur like a Pomeranian,
Maybe
and
it's like
so
a
he doesn't
cat?
smell as bad.
Sure.
Can I
He's
get a
hypoallergenic.
hypoallergenic? Yeah, I need a Falcor that doesn't set off my allergies. It's very important. So I don't know. Dragons are like, we're going to talk a lot about tropes of fantasy novels today, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And dragons are like up there. They're one of the biggest ones, both literally and figuratively. They are often the biggest tropes around. And I
One
just,
thing- One thing I did like, I was reading about so we'll talk about Christopher Paolini and his multi-book Odyssey here in a bit. But I was reading, there's a book later in the series that has point of view chapters from the dragon.
whoa.
And he said that he modeled those on the way that he thinks a cat would think, because they're very like proud and like sort of into themselves, but also, you know, happy to be around people as long as you don't bother them too much. I don't know. I thought the cat was an interesting animal to start from if you're imagining what a dragon's thoughts are like.
I have heard that comparison before, actually.
That's
idea-
not surprising.
You make a good point. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me in its way. I can see why that comparison gets made.
Like Sassy from Homeward Bound,
Mhm.
a very proud
Right,
feline
yes.
who doesn't
Yeah.
truck with kind of normal dog loyalty behavior stuff, for sure. Or at least, I think in that story, she's sort of in denial about it, and Chance teases her a lot. This is not a Homeward Bound podcast. This is a podcast
Unfortunately.
about the book Eragon by Christopher Paolini. It does prominently feature a single dragon.
Can I tell you guys something that I didn't catch the fact that it's the word dragon, but with an E instead of a D until someone pointed it out, and I felt like such a dodo bird.
Oh no.
Yeah, I didn't even notice. And once they pointed it out, I got like so angry. But
I was too focused on it being like Aragorn with an E
Yep.
and no R.
Yeah.
So I didn't know which thing that was being, let's say, paid homage to.
Why not both?
With the name of this character.
So, I have not read any other books by Mr. Paolini.
Oh.
I've heard of this book before, and I knew that it was like an early aughts fantasy novel, kind of that like Harry Potter was also happening as it came out. So there's
the Lord of the Rings movies had come out earlier in that decade, and so everybody was on it. It was like there's a gold rush for like kid or YA lit that could be turned into some kind of high fantasy movie.
Sure.
With greasy looking guys and swords and stuff.
I was familiar with I had heard of the rep of the book a little bit, and by rep I mean reputation. Sorry, I shouldn't have shortened that.
What would people have thought you meant?
I don't know. I just wanted to be clear. I wanted to be specific. There's a lot of specific things in this book too. That it was like kind of, for lack of a better word, basic, like pretty at its best. It's like it's a fantasy novel. If you think there's stuff in fantasy novels, it's in this book.
Yeah.
And that it was written by a guy when he was very young. And like that both was like part of the marketing hype and also part of the like knocks against it. I don't know if either of you knew that coming in.
I really knew basically nothing about this book going on, except that there was like a dragon on the cover, and so I assumed it had dragons in it.
Good assumption. Yeah.
That was about it.
I had heard that it was written by somebody really young, but I had it in my head for some reason. They were like 12. And I was given it a lot more leeway when I still thought that, and then started to read some Wikipedia stuff and was like, oh. But I didn't like, the main thing that I knew was that it was really mixed because when you guys contacted me about doing a episode together, you had suggested a couple different titles, and I put it forth in the patron group. Which one would you guys be interested in? Mm-hmm. And Eragon got the most immediate, like, I really want to hear your thoughts on this, but was followed up after I said yes. By many, you don't want to do Aragorn or Eragon. Sorry,
yeah,
see, I'm doing it. I'm doing it already.
It's okay.
So I went into it aware how many folks just weren't into it, but that it really was very mixed. I think if you actually like took a tally, it would have been about 50-50, the comments like, for and against.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want, is a book where some people are very excited about it and some people are the exact opposite of excited about it. Like I need everybody to have chosen a side. I don't want anybody in the middle on this book.
No,
and that seems to be where people are on Eragon. Yeah, Eragon.
Yeah, one of our patrons recommended this book to us in the first place. I have a quote here from Nathaniel, who said, "I wanted to recommend a book that helped me out in my younger years. It is titled Eragon by Christopher Paolini. The author has an interesting background as well that I thought you guys would enjoy." Which I didn't know what to make of that when I saw that quote. And we're going to talk about some stuff that I read in the Rolling Stone magazine. That I think is like, some of it is just kind of like, wow, that's some wild stuff. And then there's some of it that actually does kind of feed into what's going on in the book in a way that he's embraced in how he talks about the novels also. So
yeah.
What should we know about Christopher Paolini first before we talk about Eragon himself?
Well, so Christopher Paolini is, he wrote this book. Let's talk about him in his book first. Is he wrote this when he was 15, and he was available to write a book when he was 15 because he graduated from high school early. And he graduated from high school early because he was homeschooled. And so I think he had technically graduated from like an accredited online high school and just was like done with that facet of his education. And to hear him tell it, like he couldn't drive, he couldn't do anything. He tried to make like a hobbit hole for himself, but he couldn't.
Spent 2 weeks digging a hole,
but he couldn't
dig anymore.
He couldn't dig very deep in the Montana soil. So he was like, what if I wrote a book? And he's just like, he is like modeling himself on the model of the Renaissance man, where you'd know if you had money and some like, other support in that period and were not a peasant, you would know 4 languages and know how to play the violin. I think those are the exact things that he said.
The languages
and so
and the
he was
violin.
like, why don't I just like do this thing that seems interesting to me? I've read a lot of books. How about I try to write a book? And so he wrote a book. And like and his whole life since then has been informed by that one decision to write a book. Like as of this 2011 Rolling Stone article that Craig referenced, he was living in a large mansion with his family. That's his mom and his dad and his sister. And the family business was this series of books, which had just concluded in 2011. And he was pretty guarded about his personal life in that, and so nothing that I researched since then indicated whether he was still living in that mansion or what his like status was. I know that he is working with his sister on the movie adaptation of a sci-fi novel that he put out in 2020. That novel is called "To Sleep in a Sea of Stars," and it seems like it hasn't gotten as much attention as the Eragon stuff, but the reviews that do exist of it are a bit more like uniformly positive. So like maybe he's matured as a writer now that he's pushing 40. I would hope that would happen for any of us. But his whole life has sort of been defined by doing these books and by this like non-traditional like path that he has taken through life and this like close relationship with his family. And like, that's the defining thing about him, at least his public persona.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had anything to add about that, but that's the rundown.
Sure. I mean, this book was published originally before it was distributed by Knopf.
I hate, yeah.
Yep,
I do that in my head every time.
Pronounce every letter. They put every letter in there. Say every single one. Knopf.
Before it was published by them, it was published by Paolini International LLC, which was his parents' publishing company.
Oh, that's the same name that he has. Do you think?
Funny
I wonder
how
if they're
that
related.
works. And funny that the book is the first in the inheritance cycle. Interesting. And I believe that publishing outfit was set up because his parents had split from this like survivalist cult in Montana and had published like a tell-all We Got Out book because they were getting very militaristic or something. And
this is the Church Universal and Triumphant, which entered the public consciousness in the 1980s when they said that the world as we knew it would end in nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia in the year 1990. And when that did not come to pass, of course, the leader of this church said that they had averted it with their prayers, and then after she died, the group mostly disintegrated. But yeah,
his dad went on Oprah and was like, "We got to get out of here. I'm going to write a book about it." And so they had a schema for publishing, and then when he dug a hole and then decided to write a book, they figured that they would do that. And there's some like interesting stuff around the initial, like he was going around. The first time he went into a public high school was to like wear a medieval costume and hawk the book to a bunch of kids.
Natasha? All right, look. Hello, children. Craig and Andrew have been very kind and patient, and they will be the voice of giving this guy a lot more benefit of the doubt than I am willing to give.
Fair enough.
Look, I come to this from a very particular place in my heart where I get what's happened to him. I understand. I went to college for technical theater, and I started college in the year 2003 with Lord of the Rings just looming in my head.
Yep,
and everything that I designed for every project that I was assigned was fucking Lord of the Rings. Everything. I couldn't help it. I loved those movies so much. I loved the design so much. I applied to Weta Workshops for an internship. Like I was so committed to it.
Yeah.
So like, look, I completely understand being super influenced by something to the point where you like can't see straight and you just can't come up with your own idea yet because it's so influential. That said, this is why you don't put a kid in a position to be published at 15/19 when it actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like this is the kind of thing that I'm not trying to, take away from the accomplishment of writing a book at 15, because writing a book is hard.
Yeah.
And just finishing it is something that a lot of people who start writing don't do to begin with.
Yeah.
So that is truly a feat and something to be proud of. But what you do when you're this age is you write something bad and then you put it in a drawer. And then when you finish college and you've grown, you come back and you find it by accident and you read it and you go, oh God. And I kind of feel bad for him in a way that like he got encouraged to such a degree, and it's a confluence, like perfect storm of the extreme privilege of being, homeschooled by a mom who didn't have to work, and they have their own publishing house. They can publish for you and they can fund a book tour. Like that is just a kind of advantage that most people don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what kind of writer he might have turned into if he didn't get published and like acknowledged so quickly and didn't get boxed into this particular series so quickly, because, it's the same as like choosing a major when you're 17 years old. You don't know what you want to do and you're just experimenting with stuff. And it's kind of wild that we expect teenagers to like choose their course in life.
Well, not just choosing a major, but also like the flip side of that coin, like choosing the financial commitment that it is to get that degree in the first place. Like the way that decision that you make, to my memory, I made it kind of blithely, just like, oh, this is what people do. This is what happens. And so I'm going to also do it. Mm-hmm. And then you do it and then you get out and you're like, oh, wait, how many zeros do I owe this financial institution that I don't recognize the name of? Like it's a big decision. And that's it's a really interesting, like, framing to think of him as a victim of this like success and this
victim asterisk
encouragement. Yeah, victim asterisk. Like obviously he lives in an opulent mansion in Montana with his family, and they all are. And he goes to New York City and buys like swords, and then tells people in the Rolling Stone about his cool sword that he bought. Like, yeah, that's a kind of victimhood that we could all aspire to. I think. But like in terms of his literary output, viewing him as a victim of this like early encouragement and success. And I do wonder if we did ever come back to this like sci-fi book that he wrote, if we would see, because he didn't write a ton of stuff between that and this. So there was a little bit of a break and maybe some chance for him to think and to reflect on what he wanted his next work to be. And so, yeah, maybe we do see that, like his evolution as an artist reflected in that book. But yeah, like when Craig and I were talking about the storytelling in this, like it is striking, I think, how much like the stock tropey characters, like the big info dumps, like the sort of awkward, chunky way that the story moves forward is reminiscent of somebody putting together a D&D campaign for the first time, where they're just like, they're looking forward to having some fun. They are cribbing liberally from every single like fantasy thing that they've ever experienced and kind of chopping and screwing it to like make it their own, but it's still very derivative.
And having like made some of those bad D&D campaigns in high school, there's like, sometimes part of what you're doing is kind of hoping that your group like gets the reference.
Yeah.
Like there's that like, oh, I'm doing a thing where we have to collect the Dragon Balls. Get it? Like that's what I'm doing. You know, you get
the amazing.
Like how do you work a MacGuffin into your thing? That kind of thing. There was a nugget in the Rolling Stone interview. I think I maybe saw it somewhere else. The story he tells about the publishing like arc is that like he was the family's breadwinner. Like his book like basically like made or broke their family finances at the time. But there is this immense like like there's this moment where a guy from Knopf like finds it in a supermarket, gives it to his kid, and his kid doesn't make any noise in the car, and he's like, "Oh, you like that book, huh? I guess I'll buy it," which is like a weird thing that happens. That certainly
I will say before you continue, that's a very interesting financial decision for his parents to have made. Like,
also
that is
true.
Not, him being the breadwinner for that family is not it's not the fault of a 16-year-old.
No.
That his adult parents chose to do to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also found an interview with him on CNN where they're like, check out this kid with an imagination. Apparently the kid was also in a Sanjay Gupta video series about like creativity and genius. I tried to track down video of it. I couldn't find it. Anyway, but in the interview, he basically is like, hey, I was reading this. I read this story called, what is it? Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher or something.
That's awesome.
And he's like, I liked the idea of I think I remember that book actually. And he's like, hey, I thought that book was neat. And I liked the idea of a kid finding a dragon. And I thought, like, what kind of world would it be to have a dragon egg in it? What kind of kid would it be interesting to find a dragon egg? And who else might know about it if the world is one in which dragon eggs are rare or something like that? And I just found it interesting. This was on the press tour of the second book. He was on CNN, and he was up front about like some other text that had inspired the story he had written. And he's had to fall back on, and fans of the series have had to kind of fall back on that. Like, look, he was 15 and 16 and he'd read all these cool books. Of course he's going to put those books into what he wrote, which is probably going to be the focus of the rest of our discussion as we go through the plot of this book and all of the other books it reminds us of. Right?
I really do. Okay, just real quick. I watched the Eragon movie last night.
Oh boy.
Yes.
We haven't talked about that yet.
It turns out that the book is so derivative that the movie didn't have there be Urgles or elves. Everybody's just like a weird looking dude. The Urgles, like, I didn't get it at first that they were meant to be not like orcish.
Oh,
I was
sure.
like, what is this half-hearted makeup they've got? Because they all have red eyes, but their skin just looks really dirty. Like they're miners that just came out from underground, kind of. And eventually I was like talking on the Discord, and somebody was like, oh yeah, and they totally did away with the elves or Urgles. And I was like, oh, is that why this looks so weird? They thought that would seem too much like a Lord of the Rings ripoff, and they just didn't put it in the movie, which I think is a real indictment. Like, why are you going to adapt this if you are going to completely change the universe it's built in? And it evidently sort of like, I mean, the movie did very badly, so that's probably the main thing, but as I understand it, would have completely like shelved any potential for doing the second book in the series as an adaptation, because so much of it is based on the different like groups of races in this world. So, but it
is striking how, I mean, so the magic system is Le Guin.
Yep.
The kinds of people who like populate this world are Tolkien, and then the plot is Star Wars. And like those are the three things that you need to understand going into Eragon. So like it is derivative down to the point where elves like came to this kingdom of Algacia or whatever it's called from somewhere over the sea, and they don't like to talk about it to anybody. Like, it is so just like down to the detail lifted from Tolkien. It's not even, okay, what can I do to put my own spin on elves? It's like, what if Tolkien elves existed here also?
Right.
I just moved on from that.
So, Andrew, you're a big Wheel of Time guy. Natasha, I don't know how much Wheel of Time you've read. Like,
have not read any.
Because that stuff that stuff all started
Get hyped for
before
that Amazon
this.
show. Come on, everybody.
Like those novels started before this book. I don't know where the Game of Thrones novels are time-wise to this
I think
book.
those both started in like the early to mid 90s.
Yeah,
Okay.
96 was the first, was Game of Thrones.
Wow,
And then
okay.
98
I think-
was Clash of Kings, and then it just grew progressively, exponentially more distant.
Yeah, I
between
want
every
to say
book
like
after.
like 91, 92 was around when the first Wheel of Time book came out. So it was a similar wave.
Okay. I ask because, like, so I think a lot of times when we talk about, like, newer fantasy worlds and works, like, we do put them in conversation with Tolkien for better and for worse. Like, that's just, it is what it is, because so many of these tropes, like, bled into other media very, very quickly. We've all been steeped in them our entire lives. And so anything that, like, plays with the basic colors, but maybe, like, swaps them around on the palette or something, that is usually what we're responding to. And we've talked about it a bunch when we've read different fantasy novels for the show. And it was so interesting to read this book that is like, no, what if I just painted by the numbers? Like, what if I just put red where red goes and blue where blue goes?
I can
like,
understand the appeal of this book if you haven't read Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
yet. And if you aren't super familiar with Star Wars yet, like, as a kid, I first consumed the Narnia books and, like, just tore through them and probably read the whole series, like, twice.
Absolutely. Yep.
And when I was about, I think 9 or so, I was like, all right, I'm kind of done with Narnia. And people keep saying I should try Lord of the Rings. And I tried Lord of the Rings, and there was 12 pages of a mountain range description. And I was like, I don't like this. And also the introduction of the Nazgul were really scary.
very scary.
And I was not ready.
Truly creeped out by
Yeah.
Nazgul stuff as a kid. Yeah.
So I think this would be a really good, like, in-betweener, you know, where
Yeah.
it's like Narnia is a little bit too little kid and Lord of the Rings is a bit too advanced. And this is like a nice sort of, I can see that most people who were pro Eragon in the group were people who read the book when they were like 11 and 12 years old. And I
Yeah.
was like, this makes total sense.
Well,
But
this
yeah,
is
coming at it as a 37-year-old woman who reads books for a living now,
Yeah.
not awesome.
Well, that kind of stuff has come up with much better regarded books for me too. Like when I read Dune for Overdue a few years ago, I didn't not enjoy it, but I also knew that if I had read it when I was like 15, it would have shaped my outlook and my taste
Yeah.
in books in a way that it could not do when I was in my like late 20s or however old I was when I read it in the first place. Like, it is some books you have to meet at a time in your life to really like understand the like reaction to them. And I think this is one of them. Like, when you read a thing that is super derivative, but you have no experience of the books that it is deriving from, hey, guess what? It's going to feel really fresh and awesome because you don't know what they're ripping off when they're putting this book together.
Yep.
Yeah, it's doing hero's journey stuff. It's doing Joseph Campbell stuff. But if you've never seen Star Wars: A New Hope, like, that's not gonna bug you. That when we'll talk about the plot in a few minutes, but like, it's not gonna bug you that there's just the murder of his uncle scene from Star Wars in the book. Like, that's, if you've never seen that movie, it doesn't matter to you. You're like, oh no, that happened to Aragon, my bud.
I could not. when
How bad
it's
Star Wars is
literally
ripping
that
off
it was
Eragon.
burned down. They couldn't just have him die another way. It had to be the burned down.
Yeah.
And also, like, Arwen. I almost called her Arwen. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm not trying to be a dick about
No.
it. Arya sends him the egg, and it's just R2-D2 with the, like.
Oh no.
Yeah,
That's
it
how
is.
it
What if
opens.
R2-D2 hatched and a dragon came out?
Oh
Is what-
no.
And like, he's seeing visions of her in a hologram. I mean, a dream. It's just all of the little elements are so close that I just there's a part of me that's like a little insulted. And I know that, again, he was so young, but I'm just like, man, that was like one of the most formative films in history in terms
Yeah.
of, like, and did you really think nobody was going to notice?
Well, and I guess if your parents are your editors and publishers,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe you see that people are already vibing with this book and you're just like, okay, let's get the cash and run.
Yeah, we need the cash.
But maybe also it's your job to say, you've done some really interesting stuff here. I really like the way that you've done some of the fight scenes and some of the individual characters you've come up with are really, really interesting. Maybe you should take those and do something more unique with them. I don't know. Like, could you just make it better? I guess.
Look, I as a former gifted child who feels damaged by that experience and knows that I am not alone in that, I cannot imagine how much more damage something like this must do. So I still have a lot of sympathy. The one question that I have though is how much did he buy into his own hype? That's what I really want to know. Because there was some quote that keeps getting circulated that was, in my writing, I strive for a lyrical beauty somewhere between Tolkien at his best and Seamus Heaney's translation of Beowulf.
Yeah.
Well, and there's Rolling Stone thing that
Uh-huh.
we've referred to a couple of times. There is his only response to the question of like how derivative the book is quote, "Shall we ding Joyce for reworking the Odyssey? That's the way culture works." And like, number one, sure, way to like pick one of the most like influential works in literature to compare yourself to, my dude. Like, we haven't done Ulysses for overdue. I mean, we will eventually if we keep doing the show for long enough.
I have a copy on my shelf and I'm terrified.
I know. But like, also, my understanding of what James Joyce did was not to create a guy named Bodicius and to write a sort of note for note remake of the Odyssey and say that it was his own special thing that he made.
I just can't get over because it just sounds like he bought into his own hype, and he's the exact type that would write Dante today, where he puts himself into the echelon of other spectacular writers and poets. He's already doing it in the conversation.
Yeah, Christopher Paolini goes down to hell and he's like, "Oh, hey, it's my buds Tolkien and Ursula K. Le Guin and C.S. Lewis, and we're all just kicking it down here, having a good time."
This rules. I love I'm glad that we've talked about the fact that, like, as a lot of young readers, people probably read this book and maybe that reminded them of a movie they saw once, but they weren't like steeped in all these stories, so this was kind of fresh for them. I also am glad that we're balancing this with the Joyce comparisons and the Heaney mentions, because I think if you're going to soldier through what was a planned trilogy that turned into 4 books, like, you do have to buy
that itself
in.
is like ripping off other fantasy authors. Like, everybody says they want to do a trilogy that then turns into more books.
That in and of itself, like, I think you're right, Natasha. Like, to continue with this whole enterprise, you have to buy into it because, like, your whole family is working on this now. They were working on the movie, which stars, among others, Jeremy Irons, John Malkovich, and Rachel Weisz as the voice of the dragon.
So jarring. Her as the voice of the dragon. I listened to the audiobook, and I will say the narrator does an amazing Saphira voice, where he's like, "Hello, youngling," and it's like, he does manage to make it feminine, but it's like growly throughout. I kept thinking, man, this guy must have just torn through like Hall's cough drops on his downtime. But yeah, Rachel Weisz as the voice does not work at all. She's like sexy, because she can't help it. I mean, she's like one of the hottest women alive.
She's Rachel Weisz. Come on,
yeah.
But to have a movie made of your book when you're only on the second book of the series, when you're 19 or 20, like, you can't help but eat the hype. They're putting it in a bag and strapping it to your face. Like,
so many people are telling you you're great. You must be great.
Okay. Should we talk about the story and
Talk
maybe
about the
we'll
book Eragon. Sure,
we'll find out how great it is
sure.
or not. I don't know.
Well, and then I mean, so we can either do that, and I can come back to like what reviews that I read said were good things about the book, or we can like bring those up as I don't know when the best time. So I guess I'll just do it.
Just
quick.
do it.
Like I read Diana Wynne Jones, who is the writer of the
Yeah.
Crestomancy books and the Moving
I
Castle
love
books.
her.
Yep.
Yeah. So she wrote in The Guardian in 2004 about the first book that Paolini has wrestled the ponderous cliches into a clear and forceful narrative. Eragon and his dragon mature together believably, but better still, Paolini has achieved a portrayal of true affection between boy and dragon without ever laboring the point, and this shows real skill. Seeing all this, I can't help feeling that the adulation and publicity heaped on Paolini has done him a grave disservice. He must now be under huge pressure to go on doing the same thing, even unto the 4th and 5th volumes of the series, whereas he should be left alone to discover where his real gifts lie and develop them. So saying basically like, yes, this is super derivative, but his own like energy and like conviction with the story and like the characters, like that is what carries through to the reader, like despite all the derivativeness, and like that is what people are responding to, and that is why the book is beloved, like to the extent that it is. And I did that did resonate with me because I didn't have a bad time with this book. Like I can identify every reference point for every single thing that he's doing, and I can still think that some characters like really work as like maybe not unique, but definitely like interesting, like implementations of longstanding ideas. And I don't know, like it moves forward at a really good clip. And I think that he writes an action sequence well in a way that not everybody can do it. And so like there's stuff here that does work. And I don't want to give the impression that none of it works just because a lot of it is like trite or done or basic or whatever word it is that we want to use. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm starting from with this discussion of what the book is.
Yeah, Natasha, what do you got?
Okay, so
you could disagree with my
oh no, I know
assessment.
that. Trust me,
Sure.
that's not a problem.
I don't want you to feel weird about it, but like, just, yeah.
I'm just thinking about like, so I think part of the issue for me is being a woman and just sort of being like over it with fantasy a lot.
Sure. Well, and there are like 2 women in this book.
One of whom's unconscious, literally unconscious for 3/4 of the book.
I guess the other one's a dragon. Like if you like at bet, like the most interesting female character is a dragon.
Yeah, I was thinking of Angela, who's like the weird Deus Ex Machina that pops in here and there.
Literally his sister. She's named after his sister. Her description is the same as his sister. It's his sister. It's Christopher Paolini's sister, Angela, who's in the book as a wizard, as a cool wizard.
A really older than she looks wizard. I love her. She was like one of my she's like just somebody dropped Luna Lovegood into Star Wars, just really mixed it up for me a little bit. But yeah, I feel like because that was also my issue. Like I covered Dune for the book club, and Dune has this whole thing with like this female led tradition that is very sacred, and then this like dude just turns out to be like the figurehead of it and takes over the whole thing. And I was so angry. Yep. So I have a type of baggage that I bring to things because of that. And I found a lot of the like descriptions to be just tortured a little bit. Like he can't just say lush green leaves. He has to say like, the rich verdant trees were rippling as if in a gale force. Like it's just all too much. And he adverbs the hell out of every sentence. And so for me, it felt like it dragged when it actually things were moving forward, but I was getting so distracted by the language that he was using. That's one of the things about being a young writer is that you think you need to use a thesaurus all the time. And really the simplicity is what you want, but you don't get that right away. You're trying to impress people.
Yeah. More words must be better writing, right? Because
Right.
I'm using more words.
And
Come on.
and when like the whole Obi Brom Kenobi thing, where it's like eventually he's like reveals that he used to be a dragon rider, and it's like this was a surprise to nobody.
Yeah, that was that was not a great reveal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he takes like the stage makeup off of his hand, and he also has a shiny dragon spot on his hand.
I feel can I implore us to do some basic plot setup?
Why don't you do it since you're so interested in it?
I just feel like it might be useful for someone who's listened to us kind of
talk around a book for 40 minutes.
Yeah, which I think we've made some good points already, but I want to make sure now people can rewind and they can really know what we're talking about. Okay, there's an opening gambit where a lady has an interesting rock and a shadow man who's enlisted some Urgals, kills her friends, kidnaps her, and she makes the rock teleport away. That's the opening.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Can we read the first sentence?
Please do.
Please.
Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world.
Yes!
No, it didn't.
What does that mean?
That's not any. What do you mean? I just like that sentence. It's just you're promising a lot with that, dude. And I thought it was really gonna be something scent related. I genuinely thought like, oh, is there some magic that's like, there's a gas or powder in the air
like
that did a thing.
No.
But no, he just was trying to be like, big shit was going down that night. And he just decided to really hit it too hard.
But so Andrew had told me, Andrew started reading the book before me, and he messaged me a little bit about the D&D-ness, like give me some fancy tropes, daddy kind of energy of the book. I've highlighted one of the sentences on the first page, which is talking about this shade who kidnaps this elf lady. And it says, around him shuffled 12 Urgals with short swords and round iron shields painted with black symbols. They resembled men with bowed legs and thick, brutish arms made for crushing. And I just highlighted one like, hell yeah! Like, I'm in this. I don't know if I like it yet, but I know what's happening now. I know what world I'm in. I don't know what an Urgal is, but it's got arms made for crushing.
Did I do that?
Oh, no.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you. Yes.
Now you'll never unhear it. Thanks.
That was 100% my reaction. Also,
First book.
when I started watching the movie yesterday, and it opens with the Kingdom of Alagasia, and my fiance was sitting next to me, but he couldn't stay, and he heard it. He did a spit take with his drink, and then just went, "See you later, Alagasia." And I don't know why, but that just lodged in my brain, and I loved it so much. So yeah, between that and Urgals.
Did you confirm with a third party that he had plans, or did he just hear that line and was like, "Oh, hey, actually, I've got something that I..."
You know what he was going to do?
I have to go back to my home planet now.
He was going to go play around at D&D.
Yeah.
So, big, heavy nerd energy in this house.
Yeah, I mean, he probably would have gotten a pretty similar experience if he'd stayed and watched the movie.
That's a fair
His
point.
character is a weremoose, which I'll tell you what really got my attention a lot more than anything
I'm already more
in this
interested.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Urkels and the Shade surround this lady, and she makes the pretty rock go away somewhere. And then
we spend several chapters meeting Eragon. He's a boy who lives in Nowheresville in Alagasia.
He's almost a man, Craig.
He's 6 months from being a man.
On the cusp of manhood.
Okay, so that's a thing that if somebody, you're an adult reading this book, you've read about Christopher Paolini, you've read some comments from Paolini in the press. He certainly is not afraid to overlap his own experience of growth as a late teen young adult along with Eragon's. He thinks that he modeled this kingdom after the the fucking wasteland of Montana. I don't know, the beautiful wastes of Montana that he's writing about. And I'm not saying that as like, I'm not dunking on Montana. It's just like, he's like, it's fantasy Montana is what I've created here for you. It has a giant desert in it, which I don't think is in Montana, but fair enough.
Well, we can check
the
the map.
American
I think
West
that there's a map
yeah.
of Alagasia hanging up behind Andrew there that we can consult.
Well, interesting.
It is just a map of the United State of Montana.
Yeah. He's an orphan. He didn't know his mom left him with his aunt and uncle. He didn't find out that happened until his aunt died, and she was like, "Oh no, you're not mine. We're your aunt and uncle. I'm dead now." And he's got a cousin that he lives with, and like they're just kind of living their lives. They live in a place near a place called the Spine, which is sort of like a radioactive exclusion zone of mountains where like there are monsters there, and nobody wants weird artifacts that come from there. And quote, the Spine was one of the only places that King Galbatorix.
Galbatorix. Having watched the film, I can say with confidence.
Yes, Galbatorix.
Played by oh my God, John Malkovich.
That's John Malkovich.
Wild.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Spine was one of the only places that King Galbatorix could not call his own. So he's off in the he's off on a, if we're on a rock where the planet is furthest from, or whatever the line from Star Wars is. And he finds the fancy blue egg. He doesn't know it's an egg. He thinks it's a rock. He tries to sell it. No one wants it. And there's this old guy who's a storyteller in town who tells a big story about dragons and the king and
the empire.
The empire.
Oh my God! I just realized that. Yeah.
What an interesting word to use for the
sort
of political system.
This guy Brahm is telling this story that everyone's like, yo, if he actually told that story in like a real town, he'd get killed because he's talking about how the king came to power by like kicking someone in the nuts and then cutting his head off.
Yep.
I thought that
True
part
badass.
ruled. As someone who's ever been a teen boy, I was like, yeah, I see what you're doing there.
I have to say that, okay, don't hate me, everybody. But there are some things that the movie did do better than the book, in my opinion.
Oh, wow.
The movie was not good, but there were some tightening ups of things. And the one thing that I think they did better was they show soldiers of the Empire coming in and harassing people in town. And I just didn't feel the Empire as a threat or presence in the book. It was constantly referenced that they're evil, and eventually he like sees a slave market, but that's so far down the line. Yeah. And I just didn't really feel any, like the only threat really was the Shade. So yeah.
No, I did I did make a note when this story is being told that, Eragon is just MAGA because the people in his remote village view the government mainly as a thing that takes their money and tramples on their liberties. And I did not, not knowing anything about who ran the government or the services that the government provided, I was like, oh yeah, this is how people in Montana think of the actual federal government.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
But this guy Galbatorix, actually, he's bad
he's very
guy.
bad.
He was a dragon rider.
Yeah,
but his dragon died. But then he wanted to come and take everybody else's dragons, and then he took their dragons, and then he was the evil king of the Empire. Yeah, and so we hate Galbatorix, and he sucks.
He does suck. He's mean.
His whole thing is just basically his dragon was killed, and he blamed the dragon riders, even though they weren't responsible for it at all. And it's implied that he went mad with grief. Yeah. And then he's just crazy. And that keeps being a thing, is just people just went nuts and they're bad guys now. And I was just like, is that it? Really?
I think later in the novel, people are talking about why he's using the Ergal to do his dirty work now. And it's it's similar to the works in Lord of the Rings, and they're like, well, it's surely a sign of madness that he's working with these monsters. He would a real person wouldn't do that. Like, okay. Now, when we get some of these lore dumps we get from the character Brahm, who is the guy who told the Nutshot story, but actually he's got a secret history that he takes a very long time to tell our hero Eragon about. Because
if I tell you about it all at once, then that makes the book much more shorter.
When I say that it dragged for me, this is like a major reason why was his repeated, you don't need to know that information, knowing that could be dangerous for you.
Yeah.
People have attempted to kill this kid like 11 times by now. Yeah. Just tell him. What is worse than, what...
Would you say that this book tended to drag on?
All right, I'm gonna go. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Yeah, this is good. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Anyway, you get some basic kid growing up stuff, and then the egg hatches, and a little dragon comes out, and he pets the dragon. He gets a cool little mark in his hand that is now he has dragon powers or something. Mm-hmm. And he has to take care of the dragon, but he wants to keep the dragon a secret. And then he talks to Brahm, and he's like, "Hey, are dragons a thing? Like, I'm not going to tell you."
I'm asking for a friend about dragons, and Brahm's like, "Who's your friend?" And Eragon's like, "I don't remember.
I don't have friends." And he goes out in the woods to feed his dragon for a while, and when he comes back, his family's dead. Or his uncle has been burned by the Razak.
Mm-hmm. Nice apostrophe in that word for no reason.
Yeah.
Love an apostrophe.
There's apostrophes all over the place in this book. Lots of umlauts.
Mm-hmm.
And what's a little triangle they put above an A? Little arrow guy.
The accent aigu. No, that's just a normal accent. I don't know what it's called.
It doesn't matter, but there's lots of like little bits and pieces on the language here.
Accent.
I'm real curious if he like knew what they did to words, or if he just threw them in there. Because I know at 15 I would have just been like willy-nilly throwing them in there.
Different.
The circumflex.
Oh, the circumflex. Yes,
is the name of the little triangle.
Weird circumflex, but okay.
Shut up.
Stop. He's named the dragon Saphira, based on a recommendation from Brahm.
Brahm has like this baby names for dragons book that he'll just read out of for you if you go and ask him.
I guess this is a good point to talk about the Eragon Saphira relationship, like overall, because you mentioned it in that Diana Wynne Jones piece, Andrew, and like the way that the book establishes it is they have a mental connection, and this is like the way one of the things that magic can do in the book is you can like do telepathy, you can get into someone's head and like kick stuff around, you can but you can like IM each other and send each other photos of what you're seeing.
I think it's a DM, Craig, is a dragon message.
So I don't know,
you guys are really on it tonight. I'm appreciating it. I just sit back and let that happen.
Feel about just like them as a pair, because I think while I think I agree with Wynne Jones, like there's a lot of stuff in this book that is like, wow, even the plot beats I've seen elsewhere, and there are surely character relationships like this, but this felt at least like he'd thought a lot about how these two characters might interact.
I like Saphira. I'll start with that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought she was mostly pretty good.
It's interesting because she's a dragon, which in the world there haven't been that many lately, but they used to be around a lot, and they got in a fight with the elves, and then the dragon riders were invented to like quell that whole war. She like becomes like a full-fledged person pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really explained. I guess I intuited it was because she could hear his brain, and I guess other people's brains sometimes. She was just like learning language super quickly.
This is something that I actually wish had been like explained a little bit more, because it feels like she inherited the memory of like every one of her species.
Sure.
Because she's brand new, and she sees the Razak and is like calling them murderers and egg breakers and everything. She knows she's never seen one before, but she has this like well of information that she has access to. And Eragon never asks how she knows any of this. It's just sort of taken for granted as if she had been alive for thousands of years already and not born like
there was
earlier.
There's an interesting thing late in the book where she's talking to Eragon, where she says this thing. She's talking to him and she calls him a hatchling. A hatchling, that is what you are, a hatchling struggling into the world. I may be younger than you in years, but I am ancient in my thoughts. And I thought that was an interesting, like, if you're a dragon in this world, you've got this like link to other like this, some kind of well of deep knowledge that you have by like virtue of your species. And I don't know. I thought that was an interesting flourish. It's probably not totally original, but
well, and what does Brahm say? He's like, stuff just happens around dragons sometimes. You gotta be on the lookout. Like, we don't even know.
She just like makes a crystal tomb, and then later he's like, how'd you do that? And she's like,
I don't know. Dragons. Remember when Brahm said dragons are
she does
be like that sometimes? Like that's what it is.
So they have to go on the run because his uncle's dead. He goes off with Brahm and his dragon. I kind of liked that it didn't immediately, even though it's like it's frustrating that Brahm is not telling him things or enough things. I kind of liked that the initial adventure wasn't immediately we got to save the galaxy or whatever. It was, I want to get vengeance for my uncle. Like, and it's until that kind of ham-fisted, oh, there are slavers in the world, Spider-Man with power responsibility moment that he has later before he signs up to like fight the Empire forever.
I don't even know. I think you're giving him too much credit when you say it's a Spider-Man moment. It's more like a suburban wine mom discovering that injustice exists in the world and then deciding that you've been placed on this earth to correct the injustice.
Ouch.
I just realized that bad stuff happens, and now I'm mad about it.
Oh my god!
and like this was something that kind of, I will be honest, did confuse me. Is that like I thought it was they have to go on the run, but it's not really framed that way. It's I'm gonna find them and take my vengeance, and Brahm's like, they want you to follow them. This is what they're after. But also, let's do that.
Let's do it.
Which I like. There was just so much conflicting sort of motivation and I don't know. It was just sort of a wild thing to me that like Saphira is constantly just waiting outside towns and stuff. And for me, it's like, well, what if they like stole his dragon and he had to get her back? Like, wouldn't that be more of a motivating? And then we don't have to just have this dragon that's like stuffed in a fridge, forgotten about for half the book, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and then like the exact instant that he catches up to the Razak and actually has to confront them, like they kick his ass because he's a little boy. Like that instantly happened.
And that's the result of this, like, we have to track their poison Amazon purchases. We have to find the receipts for the poison that they ordered. And that's how we're going to know where they're going. And then we can, I did get confused by that. But yes, then he finds them, Andrew, and he's only a baby magician at that point.
Oh my God.
And so
he's like, I don't know. So let's blast through some stuff. So the structure of this like first half of the book is he's traveling around with Brahm, and they're tracking the Razak, and they run into the Urkels a couple of times. But mainly, it's just like Eragon needs to be transformed from a little boy into a warrior man, like super fast. So within the space of 6 months. Which I'd never have learned anything in 6 months, but he learns how to be as an amazing a sword fighter as the world has ever seen. He learns how to be a very good magician. He basically starts calling himself a dragon rider, which is kind of a fake it till you make it situation. This kind of person has not existed in the world in years and years, but I have a dragon and I ride her, and so I must be a dragon rider now. Like that's my thing. So
he
just
learned
like
how
becomes,
to read in like a week.
He did learn how to read in like a week.
Yeah, which that's how it happened for me. And he just instantly becomes competent at a bunch of stuff. And I mean, Craig, you brought up the Wheel of Time earlier. I think one of the things that the early Wheel of Time books are good at is the transition that these characters go through from like country lads to like leaders of men. Like
Sure.
I think the first 3 or 4 Wheel of Time books are very good at organically showing how like being pulled out of this town and told that you have a destiny would actually take some time to like actually be internalized and be a thing that you like believed about yourself. And the book Eragon isn't very good on.
No, it's a speed run.
Because it just kind of it's 100% speed run. Learn all the ancient language. Learn all the sword tricks.
The thing with the magic really drove me nuts. Like, because the first time he uses it, he evidently, as we learn later, the way that magic works here is that you need intent behind a word that is linked to what you're trying to do. And he just knows a word that was said by Brahm once earlier as what Eragon thinks was a curse, like a curse word.
Yeah.
And so in the midst of this fight, he just blurts that word out with no prior knowledge of what it does. He didn't realize Brahm was doing magic at the time. He's never done magic in his life. And it's just a total accident. And I just think you can't have a magical system that's based on using specific words and have the first instance of using that magic be a total accident.
You've gotta,
there's gotta be like, he feels the power, but he doesn't know what to do with it. And maybe something happens there where he like perhaps hurts himself because it isn't released or something. And Brahm figures out, oh, actually, I think I might know what that is.
Well, or even like he made some link between the way that Brahm used the word that made him, I don't know, but like Brahm uses it as a match basically. And then Eragon uses it to no scope a couple of
Urkels. Yeah. So the thing, there's two thoughts I have.
I just am picturing Urkels like attacking him, and it's amazing.
I have two thoughts.
Oh wait, no, that's his other character.
On some of this stuff. One is the, I guess 2.5. One is that we mentioned it earlier. The word of power thing does seem, if not directly, indirectly lifted from Le Guin and the Earthsea series. It's all about like knowing, like
the true name. The true name of the thing, and so you have power over the thing because you know its true name.
And I did like the little note where they're like, if you knew the name of the language, you could control the entire language. That's a cool little like logical thing, which I thought was neat. I think overall, there's like a couple beats where Eragon, in a way that I certainly identified with, was like, well, what is the next logical step of this power I have? And like, well, I could cure a bruise. Could I make a person come back to life? And Brahm's like, stop it. Could you just let's not talk about that. That's a nightmare. And I did appreciate the couple of times where you just have a teenager who is discovering these like special abilities. And he's like, well, what could I do with that? I bet I could. Like when he scries for the first time, he's like, could I scry something from my dreams? And you're like, yeah, you could, bud. I guess. Like no one knows what you're doing, but cool. So I liked that about Eragon. I think that overlaps with the other thing I've been thinking about. I did find a post from Christopher Paolini on Dr. Sanjay Gupta's blog from 2006. After he'd been in that series about genius and creativity. And he talks about the type of learning that his parents used in homeschooling, about like putting things in front of him that he might be curious about and then encouraging him to do that research and like having that be the basis of learning. He says, the rich environment my parents provided taught us to embrace new knowledge and to enjoy educating ourselves. These are habits that anyone can learn on their own. Whenever you come across an unfamiliar fact or skill, grab hold of it and learn everything possible about it. Now, Is that always true? I don't know that I agree. Are there limitations to the things that this could teach you? Perhaps. Do I think that a person who was raised this way would think that their hero could also do the same? I do think so. And I think like that's a character trait that is Paulini inside of Eragon. Like, this is a way the world could work. This is the way a person could be. It happens very fast, and it is a speed run. And I think I think you made a good point, Natasha, that like there are perhaps less errors along the way or interesting complications as he learns the system, probably. I don't know.
I mean, he doesn't really make many wrong decisions. It's I don't know. Look, he's a Gary Stu. It's fine. One expects this a lot of the time. But I do like. I wish that, for example, spoilers, Brom dies. I would like that to maybe be his fault. You know, like something that he just has to like live with, because that's life, kids. Like, you grow up and look back at some things you did and you're just like, whew, that was just my bad. This is such a my bad. And I don't feel like there's a lot that he feels that way about beyond just like the regret that something happened. It's never really a regret about his own actions.
Like even the times when Brom tells him like, you made a mistake. Like, I don't actually feel the effects of that. Like there's that sequence where he and Brom are being chased by the Urkels, and Eragon and Saphira like swoop down and scare the Urkels, and like Eragon uses his magic too good and it like tires him out a lot, and then they wake up and like nothing bad has happened, but Brom was like, you shouldn't have done that.
Well, what Brom is like, you if anything, you let them get away and now they've seen you and yada yada yada, but then Eragon's like, well, but they were talking to me like they wanted to meet me anyway. So like, there's
but nothing that happens subsequently would have happened or not happened as a result of that encounter going different. And like that's the main thing, is like Eragon is just sort of allowed to saunter into any given room and do whatever it is that he wants, and it always ends up being essentially right after, and you don't actually feel any of his inexperience like coming to bear or
costing him things
or anybody.
The back half of the book, after Brom is killed, he's saved by this.
Brom dies.
If you've seen
his learned elder father figure dies. Craig, it's a huge spoiler.
It's very surprising. Nobody saw it coming.
Yeah, spoiler, he's a dragon rider. Duh. I just made a note that just said, duh.
I just can't get over Eragon being surprised. Like, because that makes it feel to me that the author intended this to be a shock.
Yeah.
And what?
Nope.
What did you, how?
It is.
Where were we supposed to think he knew all of this? And then, like, when he finds out that Eragon named his dragon Saphira, there's like a single tear that comes out. Like,
there was a single tear.
Boy,
we all know he had a dragon with the same name, obviously.
I wonder where this guy came from, where he knows everything about magic and dragon riders and riding dragons and the kind of marks that you would have on your hand if you rode a dragon. Man, I wonder what this guy's history is. What a mysterious man Brom
He's probably
is.
just like a mechanic or something. He probably just like reads a lot of books. But we get to meet this character named Murtaugh, who is a proficient swordsman, bowman, who saves Eragon when Brom gets killed. And then we get this like second journey where they're going to meet the Varden, which is the name of the Rebel Alliance in the book. And that's where I guess elves are real and they might be involved, and dwarves are real and they're involved. And they got to hike across the Montana desert to get to the Varden, which
they talk about how this vast and trackless, inhospitable desert that takes 2 days to cross on foot.
Right?
Like, what are you talking about?
I kept thinking that was going to continue, and then it's just over, and I was like, oh. And I look like, Murtaugh is like, you're real confident you could just pull water out of the ground. And Eragon's like, yeah, I am. I'm very confident.
I am.
And then when it comes time, he's like, this is way harder than I thought. The water's very deep. And I'm like, you think it's a desert, Jag? Of course it's harder. What are you talking about? And look, I'm going to put actual cash money. It's not in this book, but Murtaugh is Mordred. That is definitely his brother. 100%.
Oh.
No doubt in my mind.
I think, I mean, and Brahm is like 50-50 his dad, right?
Either him or Murtaugh's dad, so that he's
Morzin
also
or
Darth
Morkin?
Vader's son.
Galbatorix.
I don't. So here's the thing.
Galbatorix
There's the king name is
Palpatine.
Galbatorix.
Mm-hmm.
There's Murtaugh and Morzon and Brahm. When Brahm and Eragon disguise themselves, they call themselves Neil and Evan, and they meet a man named Martin.
I'm so glad you mentioned this because I could not get enough.
I love it.
This is also a very we were talking about the D&D-ness of this, where one person will come to the table with 30 pages of tragic backstory, and like your name is my name is Za'ar the elf, and my grandfather died when I was just a lad, and that's informed my entire tragic past. And then somebody else shows up, and they're like, "I'm Derek the fighter."
Yeah. This feels true to me. I identify with this.
I just feel like Galbatorix is destined to become a bad guy because his name, anybody
His
who's
name's
got
very
an X
complicated,
or
yeah.
a Z in it,
Yeah.
that's definitely going to be a villain.
I
You're
know
like, I'm
about Kingdom
Galbatorix,
Hearts.
the evil king, and I am Angela the wizard.
Wait, how do you pronounce the werecat that hangs out with Angela? There's a werecat that we meet.
I can't remember because it's
it's
in the
not
audiobook.
It's not Sebulba, because that's a character from Phantom Menace. It's something like Sebulba. Zabumbulum or something?
Keep vamping. I'm going to look it up.
Celebumbum.
Solumbum.
I think
that's
that is
just-
Solumbum. Yeah.
Just a magical cat that we meet who hangs out with Angela. That's it.
Who can
That's
shapeshift into like
a boy with a knife.
a child of the forest from Song of Ice and Fire?
All this stuff comes to pass. We meet Angela. First, we met Angela in the town where Eragon learned to read, and then we see her again in the dwarven city of Trondheim, and she has a magic cat.
And she's also trying to prove that toads don't exist, that they're all
what
frogs. Weirdest monologue. I love when he's like, well, you're holding a toad, so they clearly exist. And she's like, yeah, an idiot would think that. Let me tell you.
More of that in this book.
That's a good conspiracy
Agreed.
theory, actually.
Just
Like a no-stakes conspiracy theory.
There just definitely needs to be a little bit more leavening with some humor because this book takes itself so seriously. So I think that she was just a bit of a nice. She was what did they give you as a palate cleanser? A little bit of sorbet, right?
Oh,
she was like
sure.
that in the meal.
Yes. Well, and we kind of glossed over the fact that when he broke out of a prison, when he was imprisoned by the Shade and Murtaugh helped him, they also broke out of jail the comatose elf woman from the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
Guys,
whose name is from one book and whose character is from another book.
Yeah.
he says, I don't remember if this is from the blurb on the back or an interview, but he says something about like a beautiful maiden who is more than capable of taking care of herself, which just feels like a really ballsy thing to say about a woman who's literally unconscious even when she's rescued. She's not even awake for the rescue. And you're like, she can take care of herself. Like, look, yeah, she wakes up and she's a badass sword fighter and that's great. But like, come on, man.
There's that whole thing later, like when they're getting ready for that battle where he sees her there and he runs up to her and he's like, you're a girl. You can't be in a battle.
It's too dangerous.
And she says, thank you. I am one of the strong female characters.
And
who
then she
can
like
be in a battle.
she
Thank
throws a Hadouken at an Urkel and like blows him up, and you're like, yes, Arya, please, more of this.
Isn't that like, doesn't he say it's too dangerous after she sword fighted him into the ground.
Yeah, she did kind of kick his whole
butt.
ass.
And
then
he's
like,
still
you
just
shouldn't
like,
be here. Yeah.
come on, dude.
This is happening at a oddly staged battle at the end of the book where he has
Because the book had, one gets the impression that the book had to end, and so
yeah.
It was really abrupt.
Yeah, within like the last like 10% or so, going from my Kindle progress meter, like that is when the end conflict is invented, enacted, and resolved. It's very fast.
It's like he hooks up with the Rebel Alliance, and they're like, "Listen, you're going to be our Dragon Rider. It's going to be a big deal. You have to decide whether or not you want to do that." And meanwhile, the king has been marching some elite Urkels through the desert. This was not set up at all. It just shows up at the end of the book. And they break into the dwarven tunnels. And I love the part where the one dwarf, I think his name is Olix, he's like, yeah, some bleeding dwarf came out of the tunnels where only the eccentric dwarfs go. We're very lucky that he encountered the Urkels and is here to tell us that they're on their way. And what they test Eragon for how good he is at magic. The creepy twins.
The twins are kind of rad. I'll say that I was into them.
Tell me about the twins,
They were like my
Natasha.
favorite part. I don't know what to say about them. They're like two bald, nameless magicians.
Yeah.
And I don't know why they don't have names. They just don't. Like when the king introduces them, he's like, I would tell you their names, but they don't have any. And I was like, why?
He didn't even do like you're it's not pronounceable in your tongue.
Right?
Yeah.
Their names are the concept of love or something like this. But they are very sinister. They are part of like a magical organization that they simultaneously really want Eragon to join because he's powerful, but also they hate him and make it really
some mean
clear
girl
they hate
stuff.
him.
I love it.
Yeah, it's like, and when he won't join, they're like, rude. And I was like, why would you think that he would want to do that? You were real mean to him, like right away. And later on, they send him a message and they're like, come over here to this weird secluded part that's totally empty where there's definitely an attack about to happen. And later on when he's like recovering from his wounds, he's like, that was weird. The attack wasn't the way they said. And I got jumped by somebody really unexpectedly. And I'm like, wow, yeah, it's a real puzzler.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, they totally ghosted on him. And then he had to kill Darth Maul.
It's a shade, Craig.
Well,
a shade with a backstory and a tragic past.
Played by Robert Carlyle in the movie,
Whoa.
and he is 100% the best part of that movie. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's
all. That's the closest we get to one of the wizard duels that Paolini teases, where like wizards don't actually shoot each other with spells because good enough wizards can see attacks coming, so you have to break someone's brain first, and then you can outsmart them. Which I thought was kind of neat, but like we mostly just get this shade business, and then Saphira and Arya distract the shade, and then he kills the shade. And then a guy from somewhere else on the earth, the Morning Sage, is like sends him a DM and is like,
morning with a U and not.
Yeah. He's like,
like,
hey,
the Morning Sage.
you up? Book 2. Like that's the message that he sends him.
Yeah.
Which, okay.
There's this weird moment at the end too where Eragon is like, recovering from his wound, and he stands up and they're like, hey buddy, don't freak out. It's really bad.
Oh yeah.
And he has a scar across his back and he's like, oh, I'm disfigured. And I'm like, you literally look exactly the same. What are you talking about? You've just got a sexy scar that nobody can see unless you're topless.
Yeah.
That was weird.
It was bad, and I didn't like it at all.
Especially it happened in this. There's no setup for that. I think, like, as a character or in the world where, like, that would be something he should be ashamed of. Because it also isn't like...
There's a setup where Murtaugh has a scar like that because his dad was a jerk and he, like, cut him when he was
because they're
3 years
brothers
old.
and they have to have a matching scar.
Because they're brothers.
Oh,
and if they're not literally brothers, then they're at least, like, metaphorical, like dragon bros. But
brothers.
yeah, no, now he has a scar, and the way that he chooses to describe that is that he has a disfigurement.
Yeah.
And that it's the worst thing that could possibly have happened.
Huh.
I figured too, Murtaugh is going to be the one that, because Angela says you're going to be betrayed by a family member, and he literally has one family member that he knows of who he's like, he would not do that. And I'm like, okay, then it's Murtaugh. He'll do that.
Yeah.
I did some reading ahead of the Wikipedia summaries of subsequent books, and I guess his cousin from his like home village who we'd encounter for a little bit and then like disappears for a while, like that person comes back in later books and is one of the more interesting parts. And then of course Murtaugh instantly breaks bad but then is redeemed toward the end of the series.
I dig it. Okay.
Yeah,
I've played Final Fantasy IV. I know how this goes.
you stop it. I wish this book rode a whale to the moon. I wish this book did anything that interesting.
There's one other thing that is very small, but again, bringing my baggage to it, I have to mention it, where so as I've mentioned many times, Arya is unconscious for most of the journey that after she's rescued, and he discovers eventually that she's been tortured for information about where she sent the egg. Of course, her face remains pristine. That's never damaged in any way.
Yeah.
And then when they're talking about what was done to her later, she says something about how eventually he told his soldiers to use me as they would, but I was able to nudge their minds to make them incapable. And I was just like, you really just could have not done that part, dude.
We could have not done that, but no, she has a magical way to give all the evil soldiers whiskey dick, and so they couldn't do anything. Ugh, it sucks so bad.
Like, why? Just don't put it in. Oh, God. You get what I mean. That's not what I meant.
Yeah, no, I just...
Yeah, there's a little stuff like that throughout the book.
It's right, and one of the, especially when one of the things that you can say about this book series that might redeem it a little bit is that it is for like children, and so the derivativeness of it is not that bad. But then you get like that in this book. Apparently, in another book, some character, their hand becomes degloved, which is to say the skin on their hand is ripped off as they're escaping from imprisonment. It's like, that's some deep stuff to put in a kid's book. I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you could say, yeah, this is derivative because it's for kids and they won't know. But also, let's talk about like sexual assault and like taking someone's skin off.
I think he had said, I wanted to write a book that I would enjoy reading when he was 15 or 16. So I don't think that he is writing for your, 9 or 10-year-old who's reading the first Harry Potter book. I think, you know what I mean? I think he is aspiring.
Take your skin off, Harry.
Jeez. But I think you're right, though, in that it is like, there's a tension between the credit we've tried to give it in terms of like the tropes that it might use because they're just effective tropes, and the stuff that a 15 through 18-year-old just like isn't up to handling yet. I think for me, if you were to like, Craig, you have to write a paper about the themes of Eragon. You have to. Or else you have to read Eragon again. No, I did have a decent time with this book.
You have to read Eldest, which is the second book in the series.
You're right.
You have to keep reading the series.
I think there is something in this. I will give credit to that Rolling Stone interview that we've cited a few times. Is there's something that I think the book probably could have done a better job with, or like made more space for, is probably the way I'd phrase it. But like I need to be an independent person. I need to not give myself over to the King Galbatrix, and I need to not
Galbatorix.
just do whatever the political forces of the rebellion want me to do. And we, in the like character / info dump of the last 20 chapters of the book, which is, we meet a lot of people at the end of the book. They all have competing motives and different interests, and they're all pretty upfront about it. And they're like, listen, you're important, and a lot of people are going to ask you to do stuff. And both people are upfront about the fact that he's going to need to wrestle with that. Saphira keeps reminding him that he's going to need to deal with that. And there was a connection made in that Rolling Stone article between like his upbringing, like Paulini's upbringing, and this like family that broke off from this like bizarre survivalist cult scenario of just like the type of independence and like self-sufficiency that I think the book is maybe interested at its best could be interested in. I thought that was like, I don't know, if I'm thinking about what worked in the world building, maybe that's what worked, but it could have worked more. There could have been more of it. In a book that had
like
more of
it's
a lot
setting
of
up
other
for
stuff.
that to be a struggle for him in the second book more than anything.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have at the end of this one, him like having to give a baby a blessing.
What did that?
And it like being a real high pressure situation where he's like on camera with a mic in his face, and they're like, "What are you going to say to this baby?" And he's like, and he says this. It's in the like language of power.
Yeah.
We don't
ancient
actually
tongue.
get to hear what he says. It's not translated.
No, and then Saphira like kisses the baby on the head, and it gets like a glowing head mark.
Like a starburst.
This is one of many things that
Gets
Eragon
candy.
accidentally does exactly perfectly,
Yeah.
despite never having done it before.
And I think one person is like, you gotta be careful with that.
You can't just do that to every baby. And my question is like, why can't you give that same blessing to every baby?
Yeah.
Why can't
right?
we do dragon socialism? Come on.
You know what? You make a really good point about how like, she just happened to be there, and now this kid, and it's interesting because like, it's not even suggested that his blessing gives power to the child like inherently. Saphira is like, do you think this kid's going to settle for being a burger flipper when she's got a star on her head? Like, it's just sort of presented like, well, she's going to grow up knowing she's better than other people. So,
And that'll make her
and I was
better
like,
than other people. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
it was
pretty-
sort
it's
of a
actually
weird
kind
way
of
to,
gross.
yeah. Like, I guess, sure.
Like if we in the ancient tongue know a way to like prevent babies from dying of preventable illnesses or whatever, like why don't we just give that to all the babies?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, you take 3 afternoons and you do it to all the babies, and then all the babies have it. I don't know why it has to be this thing now.
See,
that you have to like ration out to only the most deserving of babies.
Now,
They're
not
babies.
here-
They don't deserve anything.
I'm not here to say that Eragon should have been a longer book, but I do think
I'm not here to say
I
that
do
either.
think that Eragon would, given enough time, would ask that question, Andrew, based on the other ways when he has learned things and gone, well, what if I could just do it but more? Like, I do think he would be like, well, what if I just give all the maybe, and then someone would be like, that's bad, and then he'd be like, no, I'm the main character, I can do what I want.
I can decide what's good. I'm the main character.
What a book, huh?
What a book.
What a book.
It was fun to revisit books that I knew through this book. That was fun. I was impressed that in the fandom wikia for this series, there is an entire page dedicated to criticism of the series and like cataloged like comparisons between names and things. That just stuck out
I
to me.
saw that. I was very impressed.
I'm just fascinated by it as like a phenomenon that like in this community, people have like cataloged that information. That, I don't know.
Yeah, they have a chart of like, here's the almost identical word from Tolkien for the name of this. Like, yeah, it was side by side, and I was pretty impressed that they just went ahead and did it. I'm thinking about, like, I didn't realize that his family had made him the sole breadwinner. And when I was looking for information about him, there's a whole website that I assume was built by his parents about how to homeschool your kid like we homeschooled our kid.
Part of the branding, yeah, for sure.
And I'm just really like, I was so angry when I found out just like how this worked out. But the more I find out, the sorrier I feel in a lot of ways, because it just feels like they decided to cash in on this kid. And ouch, man, like, and even his college education was like a correspondence course.
Sure.
So I don't know. I wonder if he had more exposure to other kids who had seen all of these movies and everything. And if he got to know how familiar people were with material he was drawing from, if he wouldn't have gone down this road with it. Because I could see thinking that, like, oh, nobody's going to catch this. I'm the only one who's as obsessed with these books, Mm-hmm. But it's just sort of fascinating to me. It's like, what the idea when you're that age of getting published and growing famous is so seductive. But when I look back, oh my God, I'm so glad that never happened to me. Like,
yeah.
Well, because the thing, whatever it is that I would have written would inevitably have been like this. It would have been some like obvious pastiche of something that the entire rest of the world had read 100 times.
I mean, even as it stands, I've been podcasting 10 years, and there are certainly going to be some things that I have said that somebody could dredge up to milkshake duck me. And I will not be able to, I won't have a leg to stand on. I'll be like, yeah, I definitely said that. It's on tape.
You got me.
Yeah. And to me, it's like the fact that he was this like fantasy wunderkind and like was I think he held or still holds the Guinness World Record for being the youngest like best-selling author or something, however they catalog that. It's inseparable from the book itself, at least for me as someone coming to it now. I wonder if that's another thing that like a 12 or 13-year-old reader won't come into a reading with of like, oh, it's so fascinating that this young kid wrote this book. He's on CNN talking about his dragon book. Like, what? Stop.
Yeah, kids love CNN.
From what I've seen, everybody was drawn to it from the cool art on the cover and didn't know anything about it really going into it. So I wouldn't be surprised if that just isn't something that kids find out until later,
Yeah, that's probably true. Cool. I think that's probably going to do it. We talked about everything that's possible to talk about.
Well, it was fun to talk about Eragon with both of you. I can't wait to talk about the other 3 books in the series with both of you in the coming months and years of our lives.
I really I want to do that on the one hand, and on the other hand, I won't do that.
This is one of those things where you say at first as a joke, and then you're like, well, I mean, it's not a joke if you're into it. Like,
see what the reaction is from other people. Yeah. This is really fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for inviting me for this one. This was a good time. Sometimes it's fun to be mad. It's fine.
Good to do a non-Stephen King book with the
All right. Well, you guys know where to find me. You can go to unspoiledpodcast.com. You can become a patron at patreon.com/unspoiledpod. Go to Twitter at unspoiledshow. We also have a Facebook, facebook.com/unspoiledpod, but I wouldn't recommend it because Facebook is garbage. And I also have a Discord, and I will be posting the link to the Discord in the chat. It is open to non-patrons as well, so you can go there and just chat about things. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this. It was super, super fun to record. I always enjoy recording with these boys, and I will be seeing you eventually with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.